There are so many mistakes a person can make when playing Dynasty. However, some are far more impactful and the repercussions are much longer lasting. I'm going to walk through what several of those mistakes are and why it's so important to avoid them. But before I dive in, I do hope you all enjoy the video. Please leave a like if you do. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. Be sure to let us know what Dynasty mistakes you've made or how this video is helpful for you. But hey, with all that said, let's get right to the content you came for. The first mistake I got for you is overspending in trades and overvaluing those players you're trying to acquire in trades. Basically, don't buy hyped up players that have shown little to no signs of actually breaking out or being worth that buying price. And even if they do show you some signs of a breakout, you should never buy players at what their broken out price is. If they haven't broken out yet, it's one thing to acquire players that have broken out and have justified their value with their production, but it's a completely different thing to buy another player at their broken out price on a whim. This just puts you in a very tough spot if that player doesn't meet the expectation you had for them. And remember, when acquiring a player, make sure you have an expectation in mind. Realistically, how are they fitting on your team right now? And then make sure you're paying appropriate value in regards to that realistic expectation. Ultimately, you need to build in some wiggle room in case that expectation doesn't come through. You can do this in two ways. You can make sure the value you're paying is appropriate, or you can pivot off that player entirely. At the end of the day, allocate your assets wisely because they're not unlimited. Something I discuss regularly is if you're willing to move X assets, make sure you're moving those assets for the best return possible. And if you're buying high on a player that hasn't broken out yet, but at their breakout price, I can almost guarantee you there's better players to go acquire at that same value that might not be as sexy, that are more reliable than the player in question. I hate to say this, but Drake London is a great example of this mistake this offseason. Don't get me wrong, he has a lot of things pointing in the right direction for him. But when most people are saying they're buying low on the guy, they're really buying high on their breakout price, and they're getting him because he's accessible, not cheap. And without getting too much into Drake London today, I do believe that the player has a positive outlook, just that the process to acquire right now is kind of poor. Just beware of buying at that breakout price before that player is broken out, and make sure you're acquiring at appropriate value for what that player is right now, or at least some sort of middle ground. If you choose to buy in players at their breakout price and they don't break out like you thought they would, whether they don't break out to the full extent or even if it's just a little bit, you're essentially wasting assets that you didn't need to waste or that you shouldn't have wasted. There's a time and place for taking your shot. Overspending on trades just ain't it. This next mistake is one we've seen a lot with audits this offseason, and that mistake is rebuilding too hard. Now, how can you even do that? Rebuilding is fun, whether it's an orphan team that you're molding into your own or a team that you've had for a while and you've decided to need some retooling and now you're all the wiser of a team builder. However, it's very, very easy to get carried away. With a lot of rebuilds I've seen, it's basically sell everybody, get everybody off of my team. Something we referred to as the scorched earth rebuild method. Or possibly you just have a few players to build around to begin with. Either way, it's extremely important to make sure you're getting back proper and maybe even exponential value for the players that you're moving as you move them. A good way to ensure this is by moving players in season when they're the most valuable and moving picks after the season before your rookie drafts or in your rookie drafts while they're the most valuable. If you do that the opposite way, you're going to miss out on a significant amount of value and ultimately dig yourself that much of a deeper hole and make it that much harder to come back from your rebuild. The last thing you want to do is to move all of your assets and then you're coming to look at your team and it reminds you of Will Smith walking into the empty room at the last episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. You don't want to look at your team and wonder where all the value's gone. Another great way to do this is when you're selling players or even draft picks, make sure you're getting a pick and a player in return when you're rebuilding. This way you're at least keeping some consistent value on your roster, prospects that can grow into value, picks that will accrue value over time, and all this will more than likely happen organically. Sometimes we forget when we're rebuilding that eventually we have to set a lineup someday, and we put ourselves so far away from actually being able to set a starting lineup that we may never find our way back to starting another competitive lineup. Especially if you combine this mistake with some of the other ones, you're definitely going to be in trouble. The next one I got for you is allowing assets value to expire on your roster. Think about it. Every asset is obtained by spending some sort of value, either via the draft, fab waivers, etc. So it just makes sense that you should be diligent about getting some value back for each asset before it's too late. I get it. Competing is important. And maybe that's why you haven't moved that aging veteran yet. At the end of the day, we want to win, right? But sometimes in order to keep winning, we need to cash out a little early. And of course, very few players fade away without some warning signs, whether it's age in general, injuries building up, cut rumors, whatever the case is. Few players' value will go from its peak to nothing at the drop of a hat, and you might not get 100% of that player's value at that point. But for one, it's a heck of a lot better than nothing. And with high value players, you can usually get a positional replacement along with draft capital coming back your way. There's that pick and a player reference again. I never want to have to cut a player that was at one point highly valued in the league, whether they were a wide receiver 1, 2, 3, running back 1, 2, 3. You get it. I always want to make sure I'm getting something back for those players. Otherwise, whatever investment I sunk into them to begin with, unless I won a championship, was value that could have been better well spent. I want to make sure I'm using that player to, instead of win a championship once, maybe I want to use that asset to its fullest potential and help continue my team build over time, as opposed to having that player for one run and being done. This next mistake is super pertinent with rookie drafts right around the corner, and that is drafting busts early on in drafts. Nate has mentioned it many times on the channel before. Sometimes the best draft strategy isn't knowing who to draft, but who not to. It's incredibly important to make sure you're hitting on your early draft picks specifically. Taking the upside swing on an early pick is a process I'll never agree with. Make those picks that are so valuable count. If you're not confident with what's on the board, I can promise you somebody else is. And they'll either trade up for it or they'll provide you with a trade out opportunity that hopefully includes some kind of a proven vet plus picks. And when I say a proven vet, I don't mean an older player. I just mean a player that's not a rookie. And as an added note, don't just reach on the next player down the board that you feel confident in. You can miss out on a lot of value if you choose not to trade down or at least try. If it's 1 or 2 picks, you can reach. If it's 3, 4, 5, 6 picks down the board, you should probably look for that trade down partner to get that player at a better value. If you want to take an upside swing in your rookie drafts, I'd rather use my 3rd, 4th, or even 5th round picks to do so. 10xing their value when there's so little investment and value already is more valuable to me than 2xing an early pick and possibly ending up with nothing. Don't get me wrong, any player can bust, and it's a lot easy to look back with hindsight and be able to say, hey, I shouldn't have drafted that player. But it's also just as easy to look back and say, hey, there were a lot of red flags with that guy. Maybe I shouldn't have drafted him that early, or maybe he shouldn't have even gone that early in drafts to begin with. It is a process that takes a little bit of refinement, but do everything you can to avoid those players with high bust potential early in your drafts. With those early picks that are so valuable, you need to be making sure that you're getting that value back in one way or another, either by trading out or by nailing on those picks. Otherwise, that early pick that you tanked for becomes almost a waste of time. One of my favorite tips is always trading for plus assets, or at least as often as you can. However, a big mistake a lot of teams make is consistently trading assets, netting a negative. Basically, you're getting less assets in return than what you're sending. Now, you can't trade for plus assets all the time, especially if you want to win championships. I get it. However, it's good practice to always be trying to get more assets in return so you can build your asset pool. To be totally clear, the trades you're making could absolutely make a ton of sense and be worthwhile for you, especially if you're trying to compete or win a championship right now. However, if you really want to build for the long haul, you have to be in the positive more often than not. Even if it's 2-1, 3-2, 4-3, you get it. As long as you're making more positive asset trades than negative asset trades, you'll be in a lot better shape for the long run. Eventually, those assets will compound and you'll be able to use them in a variety of ways, whether it's by drafting, trading them away, using them to bridge gaps between players, or making trade up moves. Having a good bit of universal currency in Dynasty really ain't that bad. However, if you keep trading everything away, netting a negative, you'll end up with no asset pool left. And then what happens if everything doesn't work out? We're back to that empty room at the end of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And unless you've managed to add a ton of assets that are still worth flipping or turning around, you're going to be in a tough spot. If you grabbed a bunch of aging veterans for your playoff push, whatever the case is, and you can't flip them, then look back to the point about players' value expiring on your roster, and you don't have any picks to draft new players that are coming into the league, your roster is going to get very old, very quick. And as I'm sure some of you know, some of these older players are just not that easy to move. Keep that asset pool full, keep those net positive trades coming, and spend those assets wisely when the time comes. Well, that is it for the video today. I do hope you all enjoyed. Please leave a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. Be sure to let us know what you learned today, how this was helpful, and some mistakes you might have made that cost you some time in Dynasty. If you've made it through the video this far, you've definitely set yourself on the right course for long-term success in Dynasty Fantasy Football, and quite possibly never having to rebuild again. Maybe that's a video we should make. If you want more keys to long-term success in Dynasty Fantasy Football and maybe never having to rebuild again, be sure to check out the 2 videos on your screen right now. But hey, that's going to be it for us today. We will see y'all in the next one, but until then, y'all have a good one.